I should have seen it coming. Really, I should have. But when you're 28 years old, working your first real corporate job at a prestigious tech firm and drowning in imposter syndrome, you tend to give people the benefit of the doubt, especially when those people are the CEO's son. My name is Maya Chen, and I've been a data analyst at Nextcore Industries for exactly 18 months. 18 months of 60-hour weeks, of proving myself in every meeting, of being the only woman on my team who wasn't someone's assistant. I'd built something here, a reputation, a portfolio of successful projects, and most importantly, a proprietary analytics system that had saved the company millions in operational costs. That system was my baby. I'd coded it myself, refined the algorithms on my own time, and presented it to the board with trembling hands and a racing heart. They'd loved it. The CFO had called me the future of Nextcore. According to YouTube analytics, 99.6% of viewers are not subscribed. That's a huge number. By subscribing the channel that is completely free, you'll help support the channel and never miss fresh content. The VP of Operations had recommended me for early promotion. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Then Brandon Wellington Harrington III walked into my life. Yes, that's his real name. Yes, he introduced himself with all three parts, including the Roman numeral. Brandon was the CEO's youngest son, fresh out of an Ivy League MBA program, with perfectly coiffed blonde hair, a watch that cost more than my car, and the kind of confidence that comes from never having to worry about anything in your entire life. He joined our department as a junior analyst, though everyone knew it was just a formality before Daddy promoted him to management. I didn't mind, initially. Nepotism was nothing new in corporate America. I just planned to keep my head down, do my work, and let Brandon play whatever game he was playing. The first red flag came during his second week. "Hey, Maya," he said, leaning against my cubicle with that practiced, casual posture that screamed, "I read a book about workplace dynamics. I've been reviewing your analytics system. Pretty impressive for self-taught work." The compliment felt like a backhanded slap. I had a master's degree in data science from Berkeley, but I smiled anyway. Thanks. It took about 8 months to build. I bet I could optimize it, though. Maybe we could collaborate? Pool our expertise? His smile was all teeth, like a shark that had learned to walk on land and wear Tom Ford suits. "I'm always open to improvements," I said carefully. "Did you have something specific in mind?" "Just thinking out loud. Hey, would you mind sharing your login credentials? Just so I can poke around the back end, see how everything connects. Purely educational." Every instinct in my body screamed no. But Brandon was the CEO's son. And I was still the youngest analyst in the department, still trying to prove I deserved to be here, still terrified of being labeled difficult or not a team player. "I can set you up with observer access," I offered. "That'll let you see everything without making changes." His smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Sure, that works too." He walked away, and I exhaled, feeling like I'd just dodged something without knowing exactly what. The second red flag came 3 weeks later, during a department meeting. Brandon presented a revolutionary new approach to client data analysis. As he spoke, walking through slide after slide of charts and projections, my blood went cold. It was my system, my exact system, with minor cosmetic changes and a new name, the Harrington Optimization Protocol. I sat there, frozen, as Brandon accepted congratulations from the team, as my manager nodded approvingly, as the CEO himself, who joined via video call, beamed with paternal pride. "Brandon," I said, my voice somehow steady despite the earthquake happening in my chest, "that methodology looks familiar. Could you walk us through how you developed it?" He didn't miss a beat. "Of course, Maya. I've been burning the midnight oil on this one, started with some foundational concepts from my MBA courses, then did a deep dive into optimization theory, and really synthesized something unique. It was my code, my algorithms, my 8 months of work, repackaged with his name on it. I wanted to scream. I wanted to stand up and expose him right there. But I looked around the room, at my manager who was already impressed with Brandon, at the senior analysts who'd always treated me like a diversity hire, at the CEO's face on the screen, glowing with pride for his son. Who would they believe? The CEO's son, or the girl who'd gotten lucky with one good project? After the meeting, I went back to my desk and checked the system logs. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through the access records. There it was. 3 weeks ago, at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, someone had logged in using my credentials. They'd spent 4 hours downloading every file, every line of code, every documentation note I'd ever written. The IP address traced back to the executive floor, specifically to the office Brandon had been temporarily assigned while his permanent office was being renovated. He'd stolen my login. Somehow, some way, Brandon had gotten my password and raided my entire system. I sat there for a long moment, staring at the screen, feeling something cold and sharp crystallize in my chest. Not anger. Anger was too hot, too impulsive. This was something else, something calculated. If they wanted to play dirty, I could play dirty. That night, I went home to my cramped studio apartment, ordered Thai food, and got to work. I had the weekend ahead of me, and I was going to use every minute of it. First, I changed my real password and moved all my legitimate work to a secure encrypted partition that only I could access. Then, I restored my old password, the one Brandon had stolen, and began building the most beautiful trap in corporate history. I created dummy files, dozens of them, hundreds. Eventually, they looked identical to my real work. Same naming conventions, same folder structures, same metadata. But the contents were pure fiction. I built fake client analyses that recommended catastrophically bad strategies. Financial models that looked sophisticated but contained fundamental errors that would only become apparent after implementation. Optimization algorithms that would actually reduce efficiency. Market research that cited non-existent studies and inverted actual trends. The beauty of it was in the details. I made everything look legitimate, professional formatting, complex formulas that seemed rigorous but were subtly, fatally flawed, charts and graphs with carefully manipulated axes that distorted the data. Everything was polished, impressive-looking, and completely wrong. I even created fake email chains with fabricated consultants, manufacturing a paper trail that would make it look like I'd been developing these ideas in collaboration with industry experts. Brandon wouldn't just steal my work, he'd steal my mistakes, my disasters, my professional suicide note. By Sunday night, I had everything in place. My real work was secure and hidden. My dummy files were perfectly positioned, just waiting for someone with stolen credentials to access them. Monday morning, I came into the office with a smile on my face for the first time in weeks. Brandon was at his desk, looking pleased with himself. He'd gotten a haircut over the weekend, probably in celebration of his brilliant, original work. When he saw me, he waved. "Maya, great job backing me up in the meeting last week. Real team player move." I wanted to laugh. He actually thought I'd been supporting him. "Of course," I said sweetly. "We're all on the same team here." That night, I checked the access logs again. Right on schedule, at 11:30 p.m., someone using my old credentials logged in and began downloading the dummy files. They spent 3 hours there, grabbing everything I'd prepared. I imagined Brandon in his temporary office, probably with a bottle of expensive scotch, convinced he'd just stolen the next 6 months of my work. I imagined him feeling clever, feeling invincible, feeling like he'd finally figured out the secret to success. Why work hard when you can steal from someone who does? The thought made me smile. Over the next 2 weeks, I watched and waited. I kept up my normal work, building real analyses and systems on my secure partition. In meetings, I was friendly, helpful, and completely unsuspicious. To everyone else, I was just Maya, the quiet analyst who did good work. Then came the announcement. "I'm excited to inform you all," my manager said during our Thursday morning meeting, "that Brandon will be presenting his latest strategic initiative to the board next week. It's a comprehensive restructuring plan that could revolutionize how we approach client relations." My heart jumped. This was it. "That's wonderful," I said, and I meant it. "What's the initiative focused on?" Brandon jumped in, unable to contain his excitement. "It's a complete overhaul of our client retention strategy, backed by predictive analytics and market research. I've been working around the clock on this one." He shot me a look that might have been guilt or might have been smugness. With Brandon, it was hard to tell. "Maya, you'll actually love this. It uses some similar frameworks to your original analytics system." Similar frameworks? Right. The next week crawled by. I knew what was coming, but I couldn't rush it. This had to play out naturally. The board meeting was scheduled for Tuesday at 2 p.m. I wasn't invited, junior analysts never were, but I positioned myself at my desk with a clear view of the conference room. Through the glass walls, I could see Brandon setting up his presentation, all confidence and charisma. The board members filed in. The CEO took his seat at the head of the table, beaming at his son. The CFO, the COO, 3 independent directors, and several senior VPs filled out the rest of the room. Brandon began his presentation. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but I could see his animations playing on the screen. The charts and graphs I'd created, the ones that looked impressive at first glance. He was gesturing enthusiastically, probably explaining his revolutionary insights. 15 minutes in, the CFO interrupted. Even through the glass, I could see her face had changed from polite interest to confusion. She was pointing at something on the screen. Brandon's confident posture wavered slightly. He clicked to another slide, one of my fake financial models. The CFO stood up, walked to the screen, and pointed at something specific. The COO joined her. They were both examining the numbers now, their expressions hardening. Brandon was talking faster, his hands moving defensively, but the board members weren't looking at him anymore. They were looking at each other, then at the CEO, then back at the screen. One of the independent directors, a woman I recognized as a former McKinsey partner, stood and said something sharp. Even without audio, the body language was clear. This was bad. The CEO's face had gone from proud to confused to something approaching horror. He was reading through a printed copy of Brandon's proposal now, his finger tracing down the pages, his face growing redder with each second. It was beautiful. It was perfect. It was exactly what Brandon deserved. The meeting broke up after another 20 minutes. The board members filed out, their faces grim. Several went directly to the executive floor, probably to discuss damage control. Brandon came out last, his face pale, his swagger completely gone. He didn't look at anyone as he walked stiffly back to his desk. The CEO stopped him halfway across the office floor. Everyone pretended not to watch as he pulled his son aside for a whispered, intense conversation. Brandon's face cycled through denial, panic, and finally, resignation. My phone buzzed. An email from my manager. "Maya, please come to conference room B immediately." This was it. Part of me wondered if they'd figured it out, if somehow Brandon had discovered the trap and I was about to be fired for sabotage. But I'd been careful, so careful. I walked to conference room B. My manager was there, along with the CFO and the head of HR. "Maya," the CFO said, gesturing to a chair. "Thank you for coming. We need to ask you some questions about your analytics system." "Of course," I said, sitting down with my hands folded calmly in my lap. Brandon Harrington presented what he claimed was a comprehensive strategy plan to the board today. The proposal contained significant errors, fundamental miscalculations, inverted data, and recommendations that would have cost this company tens of millions of dollars if implemented. She paused, studying my face. "He claimed the methodology was based on your original work." "That's concerning," I said carefully. "My analytics system is designed to be highly accurate. May I ask what kind of errors we're talking about?" The CFO slid a printout across the table. I recognized it immediately. One of my dummy financial models, the one where I'd subtly switched revenue and expense projections. I frowned, examining it as though seeing it for the first time. "This is strange. These numbers are completely inverted. It's recommending we increase investment in sectors that are actually declining." I looked up, letting confusion show on my face. "This isn't from my system. The formatting is similar, but the analysis is fundamentally wrong." "Could someone have modified your files?" "I suppose so, but they'd need access to my system. Everything is password protected, and I'm very careful with security." My manager cleared his throat. "Maya, we've reviewed the access logs. Someone logged into your account 3 weeks ago and again last week, late at night from an executive floor terminal." I let my eyes widen. "What? That's impossible. I never shared my password with anyone." I paused, then added, "Well, Brandon asked me to share credentials a few weeks ago so he could study my system, but I set him up with observer access instead, read-only permissions. He shouldn't have been able to download anything, much less modify files." The three of them exchanged looks. "We need to ask you something difficult," the head of HR said. "Did Brandon ever have access to your password? Did he ever see you type it in, or did you write it down somewhere?" I thought back, making a show of considering the question. "I mean, my desk is in an open area. I suppose if someone was really watching closely, they might be able to see keystrokes. But that seems—" I trailed off, letting the implication hang in the air. The CFO's expression hardened. "Maya, I need you to pull up your actual system files. The real ones, not whatever Brandon accessed. I want to see the genuine version of this analysis." "Of course," I said, pulling out my laptop. I logged into my secure partition, the real one, with the real password that had never been compromised, and pulled up the actual client retention analysis I'd been working on. The CFO studied it for several minutes, comparing it line by line with Brandon's disastrous proposal. The difference was stark. My real work was solid, thorough, accurate. Brandon's stolen version was a catastrophe. "These are completely different," she said finally. "Your actual files are excellent. The ones Brandon presented are—" She searched for a diplomatic word and gave up. "They're garbage. Dangerous garbage." "I don't understand how this could have happened," I said, which was technically true. I understood exactly how it had happened because I'd made it happen, but they didn't need to know that. The head of HR sighed. "Maya, I think we need to investigate the possibility that someone stole your login credentials and accessed a set of files that weren't your actual work. Perhaps test files or drafts?" I could have kissed her for handing me the perfect cover story. "Oh my God," I said, as though the realization had just hit me. "My sandbox files. I have a whole separate folder where I test different scenarios and run experimental models. Some of them are deliberately wrong. I use them to test the system's error detection capabilities." I paused. "If someone accessed those without understanding what they were, They'd think they were stealing legitimate work, the CFO finished, but instead, they'd be grabbing a collection of intentionally flawed analyses. Exactly, I said. I never thought anyone would actually try to use them. They're clearly labeled as test files in my system. Another meaningful look passed between the three of them. Maya, my manager said slowly, were these test files accessible through your main account, the one that was compromised? Yes, I said. They're in a subfolder marked Testing Do Not Use. I assumed that would be clear enough. The CFO actually laughed, though there was no humor in it. So Brandon stole your credentials, accessed your system, and grabbed a bunch of files explicitly labeled as test cases, then presented them to the board as his own original work. It appears so, I said quietly. The head of HR stood. Maya, thank you for your time and your honesty. For what it's worth, I'm sorry this happened to you. We take security very seriously here, and we take credit theft even more seriously. This conversation stays confidential for now, but I want you to know that your work is valued and your contributions are recognized. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Part of me, a small part, felt guilty. Brandon was an entitled thief, yes, but I'd systematically destroyed his career. That was a big step, even for revenge. Then I remembered the look on his face in that meeting, when he'd presented my system as his own. The casual way he'd stolen months of my work. The smug confidence that came from knowing his father's name would protect him from consequences. The guilt evaporated. That afternoon, Brandon's desk was cleared. The official story was that he was pursuing other opportunities. But everyone knew what that meant. The CEO himself looked diminished, older somehow. His golden boy had been exposed as a fraud, and there was no amount of nepotism that could save him from that. 3 days later, I was called into the CEO's office. My heart hammered as I rode the elevator to the executive floor, uncertain what to expect. He was standing at his window when I entered, looking out over the city. For a long moment, he didn't speak. Ms. Chen, he said finally, still not turning around. I owe you an apology. That I hadn't expected. Sir? He turned to face me then. He looked tired, older than his 60 years. My son stole from you. He violated your trust, your security, and your intellectual property. And he did it because he thought he could get away with it. Because I've spent his entire life teaching him that he could get away with anything. I didn't know what to say to that. I've reviewed your actual work. The CFO showed me everything. Your analytics system is brilliant, genuinely innovative, and Brandon tried to take credit for it. He paused. I'm told he accessed test files instead. Part of me wonders if you knew he would. My blood went cold. Did he know? Had he figured it out? But he was smiling, a sad, weary smile. Regardless of what happened or how it happened, my son is responsible for his own actions. He chose to steal. He chose to lie. And he's facing consequences for the first time in his privileged life. He walked to his desk and picked up a folder. This is a promotion packet. We're making you senior data analyst, effective immediately. 15% raise, your own team, and full autonomy over your projects. Your work deserves recognition, and you deserve better than what happened here. I took the folder with numb hands. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me. You earned this. He extended his hand, and I shook it. And, Ms. Chen, in the future, please make sure your password is more secure. We wouldn't want anyone else accessing your files, test versions, or otherwise. There it was. He knew, or at least he suspected. But he wasn't going to pursue it because, in the end, his son had still been the one to steal, to lie, to betray trust. I'll be more careful, I said. I'm sure you will. I walked out of his office in a daze, clutching my promotion packet. In the elevator, I finally let myself feel it. The relief, the vindication, the pure satisfaction of a plan perfectly executed. Brandon's career at NextCore was over. My career was just beginning. That evening, I went home and deleted all the dummy files. Every single one wiped from existence. The trap had served its purpose. I didn't need it anymore. Then I poured myself a glass of wine, cheap stuff, because even with a raise, I was still paying off student loans, and toasted to my own reflection in the window. To test files, I said to my empty apartment, may they always serve their purpose. The next morning at work, there was a new analyst sitting at Brandon's old desk. She looked young, nervous, eager to prove herself. I recognized that look. I'd worn it myself not so long ago. I walked over and introduced myself. Hi, I'm Maya. Welcome to the team. She brightened. Thank you, I'm Sarah. I'm so excited to be here, but honestly, I'm a little intimidated. Everyone seems so experienced. You'll do great, I said. Just remember, keep your passwords secure, back up your work, and never let anyone take credit for what you've built. She laughed, thinking it was a joke. I smiled back, knowing it wasn't. Because in corporate America, you can be brilliant, hardworking, and talented, and people will still try to steal from you. They'll take your ideas, your work, your credit. They'll do it because they think they can, because they've never faced consequences, because the system protects them. But sometimes, just sometimes, you can set a trap so perfect, so elegant, so beautifully justified that even when they figure out what you've done, they can't touch you. Brandon learned that lesson the hard way. And me? I learned that sometimes the best revenge isn't hot and impulsive. Sometimes it's cold, calculated, and wrapped in a folder labeled Testing, Do Not Use. 3 months later, my analytics system was implemented company-wide. My real system, the one I'd built and protected and defended. It saved NextCore $15 million in the first quarter alone. The CEO mentioned me by name in the shareholder meeting. My team grew from 3 people to 12. I never heard what happened to Brandon. The rumor mill said he'd moved to LA, that his father had set him up with a trust fund position at a friend's company. I hoped, wherever he was, that he'd learned something. But I doubted it. People like Brandon rarely did. What I did know was this. I'd stood up for my work. I'd protected what I'd built. And when someone tried to steal it, I'd made sure they regretted it. Some people might call it revenge. I called it justice. And tomorrow I had a meeting with the board to present my next project, a comprehensive security protocol to protect intellectual property and prevent credential theft. They'd asked me specifically to develop it, to make sure what happened with Brandon could never happen again. I was going to call it the Chen Authentication System. After all, if you're going to name something after yourself, you might as well make sure you're the one who actually built it. The irony wasn't lost on me, and every time I thought about it, I couldn't help but smile.